Welcome back to Notebook. We hope you enjoyed that very talented group that was directed by Jim Allen of the Riverside Children's Theater. Now, many of you will recognize our next guest as a longtime member of the school board, but many of us, myself included, remember Bill Marine as a spirited, if not as successful, coach of the Vero Beach High School varsity men's basketball team. But Mr. Marine is now working on a very special project to chronicle the history of that group, and Mr. Marine has granted us some time here on Notebook today to talk about his project. Welcome to Notebook, Mr. Marine. It's really a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you.
And I know we were chatting before we began that this is probably the first time you've been in front of school district cameras since you left the board.
A lot more relaxed this way.
But yes, as we say, you forget they're there after a while.
Right.
Well, tell us about this project, and really what was your reason for wanting to get into the history of Vero Beach High School basketball? And I say men's basketball. In those days we didn't have ladies basketball.
Yeah, I think girls basketball started in '77. Janice, I love to look over yearbooks, high school yearbooks.
Just happen to have one right here.
Exactly.
Just happen to pull out.
And I spent one morning looking at very old yearbooks. As a matter of fact, going back to 1942. In fact, they're right downstairs, adjacent to the business office. And then about 2 days after that, my son David gave me a book called Pond Birds, a Gator basketball history. Author was Bill Koss from Gainesville, a financial advisor and a former Gator player, and he wrote a book about Gator basketball history. And I started reading the book, and I got so interested in it that I finished it in about, I don't know, maybe 6 hours or so.
Wow.
And then I got to thinking, wouldn't it be nice if I could share some Vero Beach High School basketball history with the community? And I've started. It's going to take a while, but there's an interesting thing about Vero Beach High School basketball history. It goes back to 1944. As you know, of course, obviously you weren't thought of at that time, but that was the next to last year, World War II.
Right.
And of course, Vero Beach had a Naval Air Station, and they trained fighter pilots, Navy fighter pilots. And it just so happened that that previous spring of '43, a gentleman named Commander Stobbs got transferred to the Naval Air Station in Vero Beach and brought with him, obviously, his family, which included Bill and Chuck Stobbs. Now, Chuck Stobbs, the younger of the two brothers, went on to be a great pitcher for the old Washington Senators.
Oh.
Well, those two boys enrolled at the high school, and in 1944 they won the state championship.
Wow. Now, did you know that prior to going and looking in the archives, or was
No,
it was just something
I knew
you
that
tripped
they had
over?
won a state championship, but to read the yearbook is very exciting.
Yeah.
And they had a great year that year, and that, I guess, that motivated me too to continue on and dig out some more good stuff.
Sure. Now,
Yeah.
you mentioned the book Pond Birds. That's
Right.
P-O-N-D Birds.
Right.
Where did he come up with that name? I mean, this is Gator basketball, so.
Well, it seems that back in the late '50s and '60s, I guess the Florida had a real good recruiting year, and they had quite a bit of size. The kids that were recruited were pretty tall, and so it seems that the other athletes in the program started calling them pond birds because of their long, skinny legs, and of course, allying that with the snowy egrets, the birds that stand in the ponds
Right.
with skinny legs.
Spoonbills, right.
Yeah.
And plus, as we said, they had short shorts in those days. That was
Very
before the
short.
long.
Yeah, not the blankets that they wear now.
I don't know how they run in
Yeah.
those things. So when you came up with the idea, did you then go to the archives where the yearbooks are, or?
Yep, went to the yearbooks and started making notes, and the more I get into it, the more interesting it was. I know a lot of the people who played back in those days that are still living, and I've talked to them, and
Are many of them here in Vero, or?
yeah, I
some?
see one every day. Buford Ingram is a golfer at Dodger Pines, and he was a basketball player and football player back in the '40s.
Is that right?
And we chew the fat every day.
Oh,
and
that's
he gives me
fun.
more and more stories.
I was going to
about,
say, did he give you any stories that you could back up with?
Well, he
facts.
was very familiar with the Staubs brothers,
Mm-hmm.
and tells a lot of yarns about those two.
I'll bet.
But
Well, we were remarking about looking through. This happens to be the yearbook when I was a sophomore, but the little signatures that you would put in a yearbook, like, I'll never forget what we did on Friday night. I mean, I
Right.
can't remember what that was, but
we've had so many. There have been so many great things that have happened in Vero Beach High School basketball that I just have the desire for everyone to share with everyone. And there are a lot of basketball fans in Vero Beach.
Sure.
Vero Beach is basically a football town, and that's great because you know, they draw 6,000 or 7,000 every Friday night to the Citrus Bowl, and that's fabulous. The interest in basketball over the years has certainly picked up, and I was just anxious to share some of the interesting stories with. For an example, not very many people know that this was during the time of freedom of choice in terms of. At that time, we had separate systems. We had Gifford Junior Senior High School and Vero Beach High School. And we had a program called Freedom of Choice, where kids who could not get certain academic subjects at Gifford Junior Senior could transfer to the high school if they were available, called Freedom of Choice. And that's when we got two young basketball players named Paige Wilkerson and Charlie Russ.
remember them
And
well.
people don't realize or don't remember that Paige Wilkerson's number was retired by the senior class, whatever. I think
It
his
would
year
be
was
67.
67.
The senior class of 67,
his
Larry
number
Jones.
was retired by the senior class of Vero Beach High School.
And there are many of that class still remaining in Vero Beach. That's one
Absolutely.
of those classes that a lot of people stayed around or
And
came
I want
back.
to get that jersey. I want to get I don't know whether you know it or not, but we have a new lobby for the gymnasium. And it's loaded with trophy cases. In fact, most of those cases are filled. But I want to get his jersey number up there with a picture, just to let people know that he was a fabulous young man.
Right.
Not just a great basketball player, but a
But he was-
fabulous young man.
But he was a very quiet and unassuming young man, contrasted with Charlie Russ, who was a jokester
Exactly.
and kind of the personable one.
Exactly. Paige was accepted by the student body, and if everybody loved him.
You couldn't not.
It was just
As well as Charlie.
ex-
Paige
oh
was
yeah,
a year
Charlie
younger
was,
than I.
Charlie was very
year-
popular.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now,
that
how
was
were
a-
you going about and by your mentioning that, especially the photographs, I would imagine that that any kind of cooperation with the Press Journal would help because they would have the photos. But how are you going about pulling all this together? Are you going by decades or eras or coaches?
No,
maybe?
I'm actually going. In my mind, I've kind of divided it into not necessarily eras, but close to that. You know, in high school sports, there's not a lot of continuity from one, say, 10 or 11 year period to the next because of change of coaches, time moves on. In this case, I've jotted down things that I think I would start, and this will not be a book, but it would be a series of maybe a 6 or 7 part series on Vero Beach High School basketball history. I would need the help of the Press Journal. If I could get their help, it would be fabulous.
Particularly with photographs.
Oh, absolutely. I just think it'd be real. But it would be something like this: the war years, the 50s with Hale Williams, Rob Whittier, and Eddie Trim. That doesn't ring a bell with people, but it does with me because
The name Trim does.
right, Eddie Trim, the Trim AC. That's his brother.
Right.
Eddie since has moved away. The 60s with Dick Tansey, Paige Wilkerson, and Carson Coleman came to us from Kentucky and had an outstanding career here.
Right.
And then the rebuilding years, I look at that as probably the early 80s, and a young man, again from Kentucky, named John Davenport came here and was here for 3 years and just did a fabulous job of rebuilding the program and getting interest up
Right.
in the sport. And then Chuck Lowendick, there's another story by itself. This young man came here, I think his first year was 81, if I'm not mistaken. He's been here.
I didn't realize he'd been here that long.
No, it wouldn't be. It would be 89.
89, okay.
89. I'm
So it
sorry,
would be
89.
8 or 9 years.
And he, in 10 years, his clubs have won 209 ball games and lost 97. Well, that probably doesn't mean a lot to the average person, but to a basketball fanatic
Right.
such as I, that's an
that's a
average
28
of almost
season.
21 wins a season.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, in high school circles, that's unheard of.
That is unheard of.
You know,
And were this a basketball town more so than a football town, he would be on a pedestal.
exactly.
I imagine.
And I really, he's probably the best kept secret in town. He does a great job with the kids. He's taskmaster now. He's a hard-nosed guy,
seen
and
his
he
practices.
demands a complete commitment from the kids. But the results show.
Yeah, but as were you, don't you feel like that you were a very strong coach? It's just that sometimes
Yeah, probably,
years go where there's maybe not a lot of talent there.
Probably tried to overcoach. Probably too enthusiastic.
But I will, and you were a very spirited
well,
coach.
When you look back, the pride of my getting here, there wasn't a lot going on in basketball. As a matter of fact, I'm not sure, but I think I'm correct. I think they won one game the previous year to my getting here. And I didn't find a lot of interest in 61.
I was going to say it was 61, was it not?
Would
when
be
you came?
October
Right.
61. And I anticipated about 50 youngsters coming out for basketball in October 61, and 8 showed up.
Uh-huh.
So
That
I
makes it
knew
tough.
I knew then that it was going to be a tough job. And we made some progress. I got the kids in basketball camps. We had Christmas tournaments, which started in my second year at the old gym, which is now the Freshman Learning Center gym, and it was quite a ride. But and I'll tell you another interesting story about my brief coaching career here. During all that time, that 4-year period, Dick Tansey, who was a New Jersey high school student, had grandparents in Vero Beach. And during my second year, I started a summer basketball camp. And he attended all of my camps from then on, the second and third and fourth years. And during his third summer here, I noticed that he had gotten a little stronger and he was shooting pretty well. But I noticed that he had a funny shot. I used to shoot the ball from way down low. And I tried to change his shot. Well, I'm glad I failed, because when he was a junior here, he averaged 29 points a game. And when he was a senior, he averaged 33 points a game.
And that was without a three-point shot, and he would shoot
That's
frequently
correct.
from half court.
That's exactly right. He would have had all kinds of points.
Yeah, he would have had all
with
kind of
the
records.
3-point. But so that tells you what a great coach I was, because the year after I got out of it, they immediately started winning. But it was a combination of getting Dick in,
Right.
and also Paige and Charlie Russ and other Ron Gilo.
Ron Gilo.
And John
Shulock.
Shulock, coupled with
Rondell
those
Reynolds.
people, Rondell Reynolds, all those young kids. We turned the corner at that time.
And many people here remember Gary Paris as an outstanding football player and
One of
went
the
on to
few-
Florida State, but he played as a freshman.
Absolutely, he's the only youngster that I can remember. Now there might have been some way back, but in my time,
Right.
He's the only one that I know that started varsity basketball for 4 years.
Yeah.
And he was a great athlete.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, I can remember also, though, we talk about, and you mentioned the fact that the Citrus Bowl will fill up on a Friday night, but I also can remember that gym here, that particularly when it was new, it was standing room only. People would come in, and in those days you could not take food into the gym. You had to remain outside, so that
Exactly.
would maybe
Which
seem
I
to
wish they would get that rule back in.
I'd have to agree with you there.
But Janice, that's an interesting point too, because back during Dick Tansey's junior year, which would be what, the 60s?
It would be this fall of '66
Si-
to 67.
When he was a junior, we played Palm Beach High in that gym. In February,
I remember
think.
that because I remember their player. Pete
that was
Broberg
my
was on their team.
Well, I started to talk about Dick Tansey,
Yeah.
but being in my summer program, at the end of my 4th year of coaching, I was offered a dean job at the high school here, and I had to take it because obviously it was more more pay, a higher salary, and I was feeding 4 little boys. And do you know that the day that my first day in the office as a dean, he knocked on my door, and in stepped Dick Tansey, and he said, "Guess what, Coach? We've just moved to Vero Beach."
Wow.
Well,
Oh,
you know,
gosh.
I'm thinking to myself, maybe I better go back and talk to Coach Thompson and would you please let me coach one more year, because he
Yeah.
could make me a great coach, right? But they quickly went 19-4
Yeah.
his junior year, and so that's something that I miss. But that really turned, and as far as crowds, his senior year, they used to fill the gym
That's right.
consistently.
Consistently.
It
And the
was just
Christmas
incredible.
tournaments, you couldn't get a seat.
That's exactly
Yeah,
right.
that was, and I remember the basketball team. I mean, even though we had an excellent football team too, the basketball games were so much more exciting. I
Yeah.
felt like, because you're right there,
It
right
was
with the game.
It's a very exciting time.
Well, tell us about the nuts and bolts of your project. I mean, are you trying to contact some of the players, or are you? It would seem to be very laborious to have to sift through.
It is.
Newspaper clippings
My first task is going to be to go through all of the yearbooks, and you know, interestingly enough, some yearbooks have some human interest. Many of them, much of the information is factual, obviously, but a lot of it is human interest, and so I've gone through about, I don't know, 10 or 11 yearbooks, and I've got a long way to go, but that'll be my first source of information. Secondly will be the Press Journal, which will obviously have more human interest because of write-ups.
Sure.
And I'm sure they're on microfilm.
Yeah.
So that'll be my second step, and then to pull it all together. And
Are
then
you-
hopefully I'm thinking about maybe a 5 or 6 or 7 part series released through the Press Journal Sports. That's who I've got to have help from.
Yeah.
I'm
Well,
not going
maybe
to publish the book because I'm not sure it would sell.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, I was
It
I
would be
I
popular locally,
misinterpreted, yeah.
but
But you know, for the effort you'd have to put through
yeah,
to it, and
I tell you, it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, I bet it is.
Tremendous amount of good coaching, determination, courage, all through those years with basketball. I can recall Carson Coleman. It might have been his 4th or 5th year. Had a ball club, and it was probably in the 70s, probably maybe mid 70s. That had a ball club that had one kid that was 6'2", and all the rest below that. And his club won 28 ball games.
Wow.
They were quick. They pressed. Had a very courageous bunch of kids, you know.
did you find yourself and knowing you, I think I know how you're going to answer this. Did you find yourself at any time going through that, becoming tearful?
Oh,
Very poignant, particularly with Dick Tansey. I know that story, but also
absolutely. I'll tell you, one of the toughest times, as far as I'm concerned, was 3 years ago. You probably never heard the name Travis Woolfolk.
Yes.
Without a doubt, probably the best talent that the school's ever had. There were great athletes, the Wilkersons and the Tanseys and the Shulocks and the Gilos, and you can go on and on, the Perrys. But Travis Woolfolk probably, as a junior, was a Division I talent, college. And we went down to, I think it was Dwyer High School in Palm Beach, and they had won the state championship the year before, and we beat them in the semifinals by 3, and had Dillard, Fort Lauderdale Dillard, in the final. And about 6 or 7 hours before that Friday night ball game, Travis Woolfolk was suspended from school. And we lost him for that final game, and we got beat by 4. That was a hard time. Yeah, that was probably the best ball club we've had. If you read the papers about basketball, the Vince Carter from North Carolina is going to declare pro. Well, he was a senior that particular year with Daytona Beach Mainland, and they won. Of course, they went on and won the state tournament. And I would have been anxious to see Woolfolk with Carter.
Yeah.
He was that good. That
What
was
are,
hard.
what are maybe some of the trends that, I mean, you would remember some, I'm sure, having participated in a very active way, but going back and looking from the 40s through the 50s and the 60s, and obviously we're going to have some times in there with World War II and then with the Korean War having some impact.
Right.
What are some of the things that you just have noticed that have changed? We talked about uniforms. I mean, now we're the big baggy uniforms and
Baggy pants.
baggy pants.
Baggy pants are sickening. I don't understand why.
You got to
but-
learn to speak your mind now, Mr. Martin.
Right. I need to keep up with the times, that's for sure. But
No, I mean,
no, I think the size and strength of youngsters is as far as I'm concerned the most significant difference. Strength and quickness. Those are the two things that I've noticed that are so far removed from when I played.
right. Do you think that's a reflection of a professional and/or college? I mean, the professional
Well,
game
it's-
now is
It's an acceptance of weightlifting and body training and things of that nature. You know, back when I was a kid, if you got caught lifting weights, you got kicked off teams.
Is that right?
That's a fact. I'm talking about the 50s
Wow.
or late 40s and 50s. You were kicked off the team if anybody ever caught you lifting weights.
I think you were ruining your
And now you get
physique or
kicked off the
something?
team if you
don't.
don't lift weights. You know,
Yeah,
Uh,
things change.
so it's just the evolution of the game is incredible.
Well, talk about the evolution of the game. I mean, what have you seen that's changed? It seems to me, just as a fan, and I am a fan, but that the defense has become such a stronger part of the game. You talk about conditioning
Well,
and
you know,
strength and all that.
interestingly enough, you mentioned defense. Chuck Lowendick really brought hard-nosed defense to Vero Beach High School. I'm sure they had it in the past,
Right.
but I'm talking about over a consistent length
Right.
of time.
But as
Chuck
much importance
Lowendick,
on defense as on
one of-
offense.
if you talk to any college basketball coach in the area, in the state, they will say that if they get a kid that's gone through Chuck Lowendick's program, they don't worry about defense.
Is
He's
that
really
right?
a tremendous defensive coach and has done a great job here. As I said, he's the best kept secret in town. He ought to start getting out there and
Promoting them.
promoting
his
Vero Beach
program.
High School basketball, you know,
Right.
because he really has done a magnificent job. And he's got two of the cutest little daughters.
Oh,
here,
aren't they
so
precious? They're at
they
every
are
game.
something else. Yeah.
So now are you actually writing something? Or right now
Yeah,
you're
I've
amassing everything, but are you
got
doing it
some-
longhand? Are you word
Yeah,
processing?
I've
or-
always printed.
Yeah, you do have
Yes.
very nice writing.
Thank you.
I mean, your letters are. You
Well,
look
I
like an
have-
engineer. You know how that.
I could longhand it, but I couldn't understand it because I probably think quicker than
Printing.
but I can print pretty quickly. So
So you're kind of keeping a running.
yeah.
How many notebooks do you think you'll go through?
Oh, I don't maybe one or so.
Oh, really?
So, yeah. I'm gonna keep it very specific, and it's really a fun job for me because you know basketball's a culture. It really is a culture, and let me bring this up too. When I mentioned Pond Birds, the Gator basketball history, in Bill Koss's writing, he mentions that he was a kid in the Midwest and used to shoot baskets under the street light in the wintertime, and between shots they would warm their hands up in their jackets. I did that. I lived that.
You were in Massachusetts, but had the same
Exactly.
kind of weather.
And then he mentions what he called football mentality, in that football was a great sport, really the only sport in town, and they really didn't care whether we had basketball or
Yeah,
not.
that was just
and I
something-
experienced part of that
Yeah.
in the two jobs that I had in Florida. I didn't coach very long in Florida, but I can tell you this, it was tough.
Basketball was kind of a way to spend time while you're waiting for football season.
Yeah, kind of like back in Naismith days. That's the reason they invented the sport, was so you wouldn't waste your time in the wintertime.
Right, something to do with
You
those
know.
peach baskets, right?
Yeah. But as far as evolution of the game, it's gone beyond what I could ever dream. They're playing above the ring. It's just incredible.
And those guys are wide bodies. The professional
Oh.
games, I mean, they're huge human
You know,
beings.
they say widen the court, but you know, the court's big enough. It's just that the bodies.
That's right.
You know, you're talking 7-footers.
And they slam into each other.
Yeah.
It's
It's just
scary.
incredible the way the game's evolved. never would I dream that
Yeah.
it would be that it would be this.
Well, it was not envisioned to be that way by Naismith. It was a finesse. It was a little more the sleight of hand, that kind of thing.
Tremendous amount of finesse back in the 40s and 50s. Tremendous amount of finesse.
Well, you
But
can watch some of the old professional teams, the old Lakers and the old Celtics. A lot of finesse, a lot of
Yeah.
and with the guy with the socks.
Yeah, there's no question.
What was his name? That played for LSU.
Oh,
That died on
Maravich,
the floor.
Pete
Pete
Maravich,
Maravich. He was
yeah,
a perfect
just tremendous.
example of that.
Yeah, he was a 6'6" koozie.
That's
koozie.
right. That's right.
Exactly.
That's right. Well, if there's anything we can do to help you to promote the idea
Yes,
to the newspaper, if they will,
if you have
will send letters to the
you
editor.
have any influence with the with the press journal,
Yeah.
that's what I would really like.
I think that would be a real service to the community. I think the community would really, really enjoy not only your efforts but your insight, because you have been inside basketball for a long time.
Speaking of inside basketball, we have an upcoming high school team that probably will contain a 7-footer. Matt Crawford played as a junior, was about 6'10" and a
remember
half.
him.
And
Actually
he
began
is
as a
going to be a
freshman.
senior, and they've got all but one youngster back. Billy Lofton graduated. Well, I take that back. Bo Harwell graduated. He got hurt during the year, and it was really unfortunate. Bo missed a lot of his senior year because of injuries, and that was really a sad thing. But so they lost 2, but they return about 9 kids. Half of those will be juniors, and half will be senior. And it looks like it's going to be a pretty good ball club.
That's great.
It could be as good as the one that I mentioned 3 years ago that lost a heartbreaker.
Right. Well, and I know, speaking of the games back in the late 60s, early 70s, when we would rock the house. I mean, I know that's a big cheer now,
Literally
but
rock the house.
it was really, and it was packed to the ceiling, and sometimes the visiting team just didn't have a chance vocally.
Back in those days, as you know, J.A. Thompson was our superintendent, a man that I dearly loved. And he had a friend from St. Petersburg who sold gym finish. And that gentleman came over one day and was in Thompson's office, and that was the night of the Palm Beach High game. And I took him to the game. And he was from New York originally. And I'll never forget that night. We had, the gym used to have a stage. That's where the new entrance is.
Right.
We had 90 pieces on that stage, a band.
Right.
Ray Lunsford was the director. And we had
was there.
flags all over the gym. And after that game, this gentleman said, "Bill, that's the greatest high school game I've ever seen in my life."
I remember that game very specifically because it was an event.
Oh.
It was an event, and several people on that team. Well, for instance, Pete Broberg from Palm Beach went on to Dartmouth, and
Yeah.
and I don't know what he's
Major
doing
League,
now.
Major League
Major
pitcher.
League pitcher, and Dara Saravallo
Yeah.
went to Florida.
Yep.
And did he go on into professional? I
No,
don't know.
no.
He was a little guy though.
Sure.
Little guy,
guard,
but
yeah.
that was a hard-nosed, scrambling game that we didn't have a lot of big guys, but they were good size, but they weren't big like what we
it
think
was-
of big now.
It was the decibels.
Oh,
the
that's true,
noise
too, the
was-
noise.
The noise is incredible.
Well, you had to attribute that to the cheerleaders, right?
That's exactly
I thought
right.
I'd get that in there somehow.
We always had good-looking
At
cheerleaders.
least we were noisy anyway.
Right, right.
Well, we appreciate your time, and we're going to do whatever we can to help promote the idea
Yes,
of
and
your
let's,
chronicling this, and
if we can, follow up on this.
we will do that.
Right.
Well, again, thanks for your time here, and we'll
Thank
look
you,
forward to
Janice.
keeping up with what you're doing.
I've enjoyed coming.
Good, me too. Next up on Notebook, our guests will tell you all about a program at Rosewood Elementary School that is called their Panther Partners. It's an award-winning community involvement program. So please stay tuned with us. We're going to be right back.